Stories from the Morte d'Arthur and the Mabignon. Chapter 19, Book 5. The Adventures of Sir Geraint. Written by Beatrice Clay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Book 5. Sir Geraint. Chapter 19. The Adventures of Geraint. It befell one Whitsunday that Arthur was holding his court at Caerleon, when word was brought to him of a splendid white stag that ranged the forest of Dean, and forthwith the king proclaimed a hunt for the morrow. So with the dawn there was much trampling of hoofs and baying of hounds, as all the knights got to horse. But Queen Guinevere herself, though she had said she would ride with the hunt, slept late, and when she called her maidens to her, it was broad day. Then with much haste she arrayed herself, and taking one of her ladies with her, rode to a little rising ground in the forest, near which, as she well knew, the hunt must pass. Presently, as she waited, there came riding by the gallant knight, Sir Geraint of Devon. He was arrayed neither for the chase nor for the fight, but wore a surcoat of white satin, and about him a loose scarf of purple with a golden apple at each corner. And when the queen had answered her salutation, she said, "How is it, prince, that ye be not ridden with the hunters?" "Madame," answered he, "with shame I say it, I slept too late." Smiling, the queen said, "Then we are both in the same case, for I also arose too late. But tarry with me, and soon you will hear the baying of hounds, for often I have known them to break covert here." Then as they waited on the little woodland knoll, there came riding past a knight full armed, a lady with him, and behind them a dwarf, misshapen and evil-looking, and they passed without word or salutation to the queen. Then Guinevere said to Geraint, "Prince, know ye yonder knight?" "Nay, madam," he said, "his arms I know not, and his face I might not see." Thereupon the queen turned to her attendant and said, "Ride after them quickly, and ask the dwarf for his master's name." So the maiden did as she was bidden, but when she inquired of the dwarf, he answered her roughly, "I will not tell thee my master's name." "Since thou art so churlish," said she, "I will even ask him myself." "That thou shalt not," he cried, and struck her across the face with his whip. So the maiden, alarmed and angered, rode back to the queen and told her all that had happened. "Madam," cried Geraint, "the churl has wronged your maiden and insulted your person. I pray you, suffer me to do your errand myself." With the word he put spurs onto his horse, and rode after the three. And when he had come up to the dwarf, he asked the knight's name as the maiden had done, and the dwarf answered him as he had answered the queen's lady. "I will speak with thy master himself," said Geraint. "Thou shalt not, by my faith," said the dwarf. "Thou art not honourable enough to speak with my lord." "I have spoken with men of as good rank as he," answered Geraint, and would have turned his horse's head that he might ride after the knight, but the dwarf struck him across the face with such a blow that blood spurted forth over his purple scarf. Then, in his wrath, Geraint clapped hand to sword and would have slain the churl, but that he bethought him how powerless was such a misshapen thing. So refraining himself, he rode back to the queen and said, "Madame, for the time the knight has escaped me, but with your leave I will ride after him, and require of him satisfaction for the wrong done to yourself and to your maiden. It must be that I shall come presently to a town where I may obtain armour. Farewell. If I live, you shall have tidings of me by next even." "Farewell," said the queen. "I shall ever hold your good service in remembrance." So Geraint rode forth on his quest, and followed the road to the ford of Usk, where he crossed, and then went on his way until he came to a town, at the further end of which rose a mighty castle. And as he entered the town, he saw the knight and the lady, and how, as they rode through the streets, from every window the folk craned their necks to see them pass, until they entered the castle, and the gate fell behind them. Then was Geraint satisfied that they would not pass hence that night, and turned to him about to see where he could obtain the use of arms, that the next day he might call the knight to account. Now it seemed that the whole town was in ferment. In every house men were busy polishing shields, sharpening swords, and washing armour, and scarce they could find time to answer questions put to them. So at the last, finding nowhere in the town to rest, Geraint rode in the direction of a ruined palace, which stood a little apart from the town, and was reached by a marble bridge spanning a deep ravine. Seated on the bridge was an old man, hoary-headed and clothed in the tattered remains of what had once been splendid attire, who gave Geraint courteous greeting. "Sir," said Geraint, "I pray ye know where I may find shelter for this night." "Come with me," said the old man, "and ye shall have the best my old halls afford." So saying, he led Geraint into a great stone-paved courtyard, surrounded by buildings, once strong fortifications, but then half-burned and ruinous. There he bade Geraint dismount, and led the way into an upper chamber, where sat an aged dame, and with her a maiden, the fairest Geraint had looked on, for all that her attire was but a faded robe and veil. Then the old man spoke to the maiden, saying, "Enid, take the good knight's charger to his stall and give him corn. Then go to the town and buy us provisions for a feast tonight." Now it pleased not Geraint that the maiden should thus do him service, but when he made to accompany her, the old man, her father, stayed him and kept him in converse until presently she was returned from the town, and had made all ready for the evening meal. Then they sat them down to supper, the old man and his wife, with Geraint between them, and the fair maid, Enid, waited upon them, though it irked the prince to see her do such menial service. So as they ate, they talked, and presently Geraint asked the cause why the palace was all in ruins. "Sir knight," said the old man, "I am Enol, and once I was lord of a broad earldom, but my nephew, whose guardian I had been, made war upon me, affirming that I had held him from his dues, and being the stronger he prevailed, and seized my lands and burnt my halls, even as ye see. For the townsfolk hold with him, because that, with his tournaments and feastings, he brings many strangers their way." "What then is all this stir in the town even now?" asked Geraint. "Tomorrow," said the earl, "they hold the tournament of the Sparrowhawk. In the midst of the meadow are set up 2 forks, and on the forks a silver rod, and on the rod the form of a sparrowhawk. 2 years has it been won by the stout knight Ederin, and if he win it in the morrow it shall be for aye, and he himself known as the Sparrowhawk." "Tell me," cried Geraint, "is that the knight that rode this day with a lady and a dwarf to the castle hard by?" "The same," said Enol, "and a bold knight he is." Then Geraint told them of the insult offered that morning to Queen Guinevere and to Maiden, and how he had ridden forth to obtain satisfaction. "And now, I pray you," said Geraint, "help me come by some arms, and in tomorrow's lists I will call this Sparrowhawk to account." "Arms have I," answered the earl, "old and rusty indeed, yet at your service. But, Sir Knight, ye may not appear in tomorrow's tournament, for none may contend unless he bring with him a lady in whose honour he jousts." Then cried Geraint, "Lord Earl, suffer me to lay lance and rest in honour of the fair maiden, your daughter. And if I fail tomorrow, no harm shall have been done to her, and if I win, I will love her my life long, and make her my true wife." Now Enid, her service ended, had left them to their talk, but the earl, rejoicing that so noble a knight should seek his daughter's love, promised that, with the maiden's consent, all should be as the prince desired. So they retired to rest that night, and the next day at dawn Geraint arose, donning the rusty old armour lent to him by Earl Enol, rode to the lists, and there amongst the humbler sort of onlookers he found the old earl and his wife, and with them their fair daughter. Then the heralds blew their trumpets, and Ederin bade his lady love take the Sparrowhawk, her due as fairest of the fair. "Forbear," cried Geraint, "here is one fairer and nobler for whom I claim the prize of the tournament." "Do battle for it, then," cried Ederin. So the two took their lances and rushed upon one another with a crash like thunder, and each broke his spear. Thus they encountered once again, But at the last Geraint bore down upon Rebehn with such force that he carried him from his horse, saddle and all. Then he dismounted, and the two rushed upon each other with their swords. Long they fought, the sparks flying and their breath coming hard, till, exerting all his strength, Geraint dealt the other such a blow as cleft his helmet and a bit to the bone. Then Rebehn flung away his sword and yielded him. "Thou shalt have thy life," said Geraint, "upon condition that forthwith thou goest to Arthur's court, there to deliver thyself to our queen, and make such atonement as shall be adjudged thee for the insult offered her yesterday morn." "I will do so," answered Rebehn, and when his wounds had been dressed, he got heavily to horse and rode forth to Caerleon. Then the young earl, Enol's nephew, adjudged the Sparrowhawk to Geraint as victor in the tourney, and prayed him to come to his castle to rest and feast. But Geraint, declining courteously, said that it behooved him to go where he had rested the night before. "Where may that have been?" asked the earl, "for though you come not to my castle, yet I would see that you fare as befits your valour." "I rested even with Enol, your uncle," answered Geraint. The young earl mused a while, and then he said, "I will seek you then in my uncle's halls, and bring with me the means to furnish forth a feast." And so it was. Scarcely had Prince Geraint returned to the ruined hall and bathed and rested him after his neighbours, when the young earl arrived, and with him 40 of his followers, bearing all manner of stores and plenishings. And that same hour the young earl was accorded with Enol, his uncle, restoring him to the lands of which he had deprived him, and pledging his word to build up again the ruined palace. When they had gone to the banquet, then came to them Enid, attired in beautiful raiment befitting her rank, and the old earl led her to Geraint, saying, "Prince, here is the maiden for whom ye fought, and I freely bestow her upon you." So Geraint took her hand before them all, and said, "She shall ride with me to Caerleon, and there will I wed her before Arthur's court." Then to Enid he said, "Gentle maiden, bear with me when I pray you to don the faded robe and veil in which first I saw you." And Enid, who was ever gentle and meek, did as he desired, and that evening they rode to Caerleon. So when they drew near the king's palace, word was brought to Guinevere of their approach. Then the queen went forth to greet the good knight, and when she had heard all his story, she kissed the maiden, and leading her into her own chamber, arrayed her right royally for her marriage with the prince. And that evening they were wed amidst great rejoicing, in the presence of all the knights and ladies of the court, the king himself giving Enid to her husband. Many happy days they spent at Caerleon, rejoicing in the love and goodwill of Arthur and his queen. End of Stories from Le Morte d'Arthur and the Mabignon. Chapter 19, Book 5. The Adventures of Sir Geraint. Written by Beatrice Clay. Read by Aisling.
On Arabian Demonology, from Arabian Society in the Middle Ages, by Edward William Lane. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Demonology. The Muslims in general believe in 3 different species of created intelligent beings: angels, who are created of light; genii, who are created of fire; and men, created of earth. The first species are called Malaika, singular Melek; the second, Jinn, singular Jinni; the third, Ins, singular Insa. Some hold that the devils, shaitans, are of a species distinct from angels and jinn, but the more prevailing opinion, and that which rests on the highest authority, is that they are rebellious jinn. It is believed, says Al-Qazwini, that the angels are of a simple substance, endowed with life and speech and reason, and that the difference between them and the jinns and shaitans is a difference of species. Know, he adds, that the angels are sanctified from carnal desire and the disturbance of anger. They disobey not God in what he hath commanded them, but do what they are commanded. Their food is the celebrating of his glory, their drink the proclaiming of his holiness. their conversation the commemoration of God, whose name be exalted. Their pleasure his worship. They are created in different forms and with different powers. Some are described as having the forms of brutes. 4 of them are archangels: Jibrail or Jibril, Gabriel, the angel of revelations; Mikael or Michael, the patron of the Israelites; Ezrael, the angel of death; and Israfel, the angel of the trumpet, which he is to sound twice, or as some say thrice, at the end of the world. One blast will kill all living creatures, himself included. Another 40 years after, he being raised again for this purpose, with Jibrail and Mikael, will raise the dead. These archangels are also called apostolic angels. They are inferior in dignity to human prophets and apostles, though superior to the rest of the human race. The angelic nature is held to be inferior to the human nature because all the angels were commanded to prostrate themselves before Adam. Every believer is attended by 2 guardian and recording angels, one of whom writes his good actions, the other his evil actions. Or, according to some, the number of these angels is 5 or 60 or 160. There are also 2 angels called Munkir, vulgar, Nakir, and Nikir, who examine all the dead and torture the wicked in their graves. The species of jinn is said to have been created some thousands of years before Adam. According to a tradition from the prophet, this species consists of 5 orders or classes, namely Jan, who are the least powerful of all, Jinn, Shaitans or devils, Ifrits, and Marids. The last, it is added, are the most powerful, and the Jan are transformed jinn, like as certain apes and swines were transformed men. It must, however, be remarked here that the terms jinn and jan are generally used indiscriminately as names of the whole species, including the other orders above mentioned, whether good or bad, and that the former term is the more common. Also, that shaitan is commonly used to signify any evil jinni. An ifrit is a powerful evil jinni, a marid, an evil jinni of the most powerful class. The jinn, but generally speaking evil ones, are called by the Persians devs. The most powerful evil jinn, naras, which signifies males, though they are said to be males and females. The good jinn, peris, though this term is commonly applied to females. In a tradition from the prophet, it is said, the Jan were created of a smokeless fire. Al-Jan is sometimes used as a name of Iblis, as in the following verse of the Quran. And the Jan, the father of Jinn, id es Iblis, we had created before, id es before the creation of Adam, of the fire of the Samum, id es of fire without smoke. Jan also signifies a serpent, as in other passages of the Quran, and is used in the same book as synonymous with jinn. In the last sense, it is generally believed to be used in the tradition quoted in the commencement of this paragraph. There are several apparently contradictory traditions from the prophet, which are reconciled by what has been above stated. In one, it is said that Iblis was the father of all the Jan and Shaitans, Jan being here synonymous with jinn. In another, that Jan was the father of all jinn, Jan being here used as a name of Iblis. It is held, says Al-Qazwini, a writer of the 13th century, that the jinn are aerial animals with transparent bodies which can assume various forms. People differ in opinion respecting these beings. Some consider the jinn and shaitans as unruly men, but these persons are of the Mu'tazila, a sect of Muslim freethinkers, and some hold that God, whose name be exalted, created the angels of the light of fire and the jinn of its flame, but this is at variance with the general opinion, and the shaitans of its smoke, which is also at variance with the common opinion, and that all these kinds of beings are usually invisible to men, but that they assume what forms they please, and when their form becomes condensed, they are visible. This last remark illustrates several descriptions of jinnis in the 1001 Nights, where the form of the monster is at first undefined, or like an enormous pillar, and then gradually assumes a human shape and less gigantic size. It is said that God created the Jan, or jinn, 2,000 years before Adam, or according to some writers, much earlier, and that there are believers and infidels, and every sect among them as among men. Some say that a prophet named Yusuf was sent to the jinn, others that they had only preachers or admonishers, others again that 70 apostles were sent before Muhammad to jinn and men conjointly. It is commonly believed that the pre-Adamite jinn were governed by 40, or according to some, 72 kings, to each of whom the Arab writers give the name of Suleiman, Solomon, and that they derive their appellation from the last of these, who was called Jan ibn Jan, and who, some say, built the pyramids of Egypt. The following account of the pre-Adamite jinn is given by Al-Qazwini. It is related in histories that a race of jinn in ancient times before the creation of Adam inhabited the earth and covered it, the land and the sea and the plains and the mountains, and the favors of God were multiplied upon them, and they had government and prophecy and religion and law, but they transgressed and offended, and opposed their prophets, and made wickedness to abound in the earth, whereupon God, whose name be exalted, sent against them an army of angels, who took possession of the earth and drove away the jinn to the regions of the islands, and made many of them prisoners. And of those who were made prisoners was Azazel, afterwards called Iblis, from his despair, and a slaughter was made among them. At that time Azazel was young. He grew up among the angels, and probably for that reason was called one of them, and became learned in their knowledge, and assumed the government of them, and his days were prolonged until he became their chief. And thus it continued for a long time, until the affair between him and Adam happened, as God, whose name be exalted, hath said, When we said unto the angels, Worship ye Adam, and all worshipped except Iblis, who was one of the jinn. Iblis, we are told by another author, was sent as a governor upon the earth, and judged among the jinn 1,000 years, after which he ascended into heaven, and remained employed in worship until the creation of Adam. The name of Iblis was originally, according to some, Azazel, as before mentioned, and according to others, El-Harith. His patronymic is Abu Murrah, or Abul Ghimr. It is disputed whether he was of the angels or of the jinn. There are 3 opinions on this point. 1, that he was of the angels from a tradition in Ibn Abbas. 2, that he was of the shaitans or evil jinn, as it is said in the Quran, except Iblis, who was one of the jinn. This was the opinion of Al-Hasan al-Basri, and is that commonly held. 3, that he was neither of the angels nor of the jinn, but created alone of fire. Ibn Abbas founds his opinion on the same text from which Al-Hasan al-Basri derives his. When we said unto the angels, Worship ye Adam, and all worshipped except Iblis, who was one of the jinn, before quoted, which he explains by saying that the most noble and honorable among the angels are called the jinn, because they are veiled from the other angels on account of their superiority, and that Iblis was one of these jinn. He adds that he had the government of the lowest heaven and of the earth, and was called the Ta'us, literally peacock, of the angels, and that there was not a spot in the lowest heaven but he had prostrated himself upon it. But when the jinn rebelled upon the earth, God sent a troop of angels who drove them to the islands and mountains, and Iblis, being elated with pride and refusing to prostrate himself before Adam, God transformed him into a shaitan. But this reasoning is opposed by other verses in which Iblis is represented as saying, Thou hast created me of fire, and hast created him, Adam, of earth. It is therefore argued, if he were created originally of fire, how was he created of light? For the angels were all created of light. The former verse may be explained by the tradition that Iblis, having been taken captive, was exalted among the angels, or perhaps there is an ellipsis after the word angels, for it might be inferred that the command given to the angels was also, and a fortiori, to be obeyed by the jinn. According to a tradition, Iblis and all the shaitans are distinguished from the other jinn by a longer existence. The shaitans, it is added, are the children of Iblis, and die not but with him, whereas the other jinn die before him, though they may live many centuries. But this is not altogether accordant with a popular belief. Iblis and many other evil jinn are to survive mankind, but they are to die before the general resurrection, as also even the angels, the last of whom will be the angel of death, Azrael. Yet not all the evil jinn are to live thus long. Many of them are killed by shooting stars hurled at them from heaven. Wherefore the Arabs, when they see a shooting star, shihab, often exclaim, "May God transfix the enemy of the faith." Many also are killed by other jinn, and some even by men. The fire of which the jinni is created circulates in his veins, in place of blood. Therefore, when he receives a mortal wound, this fire, issuing from his veins, generally consumes him to ashes. The jinn, it has been already shown, are peccable. They eat and drink, and propagate their species, sometimes in conjunction with human beings, in which latter case the offspring partakes of the nature of both parents. In all these respects they differ from the angels. Among the evil jinn are distinguished the 5 sons of their chief, Iblis, namely Tyr, who brings about calamities, losses, and injuries, Al-Awwar, who encourages debauchery, Sut, who suggests lies, Dasim, who causes hatred between man and wife, and Zelembur, who presides over places of traffic. The most common forms and habitations or places of result of the jinn must now be described. The following traditions from the Prophet are the most to the purpose that I have seen. The jinn are of various shapes, having the forms of serpents, scorpions, lions, wolves, jackals, etc. The jinn are of 3 kinds, one on the land, one in the sea, and one in the air. The jinn consist of 40 troops, each troop consisting of 600,000. The jinn are of 3 kinds, one have wings and fly, another are snakes and dogs, and the third move about from place to place like men. Domestic snakes are asserted to be jinn on the same authority. The Prophet ordered his followers to kill serpents and scorpions if they intruded at prayers, but on other occasions he seems to have required first to admonish them to depart, and then, if they remain, to kill them. The doctors, however, differ in opinion whether all kinds of snakes or serpents should be admonished first, or whether any should. For the Prophet, they say, took a covenant of the jinn, probably after the above-mentioned command, that they should not enter the houses of the faithful. Therefore it is argued, if they enter they break their covenant, and it becomes lawful to kill them without previous warning. Yet it is related that Aisha, the Prophet's wife, having killed a serpent in her chamber, was alarmed by a dream, and fearing that it might have been a Muslim jinni, as it did not enter her chamber when she was undressed, gave in alms as an expiation 12,000 dirhams, about 300 pounds, the price of the blood of a Muslim. The jinn were said to appear to mankind most commonly in the shapes of serpents, dogs, cats, or human beings. In the last case, they are sometimes of the stature of men, and sometimes of a size enormously gigantic. If good, they are generally resplendently handsome; if evil, horribly hideous. They become invisible at pleasure by a rapid extension or rarefaction of the particles which compose them, or suddenly disappear in the earth or air, or through a solid wall. Many Muslims in the present day profess to have seen and held intercourse with them. Witness the following anecdote, which was related to me by a Persian with whom I was acquainted in Cairo, named Abu Qasim, a native of Gilan, then superintendent of Muhammad Ali's printing office at Bulaq. One of this person's countrymen, whom he asserted to be a man of indubitable veracity, was sitting on the roof of a house which he had hired overlooking the Ganges, and was passing the closing hour of the day, according to his usual custom, in smoking his Persian pipe and feasting his eyes by gazing at the beautiful forms of Indian maidens bathing in the river, when he beheld among them one so lovely that his heart was overpowered with desire to have her for his wife. At nightfall she came to him, and told him that she had observed his emotion, and would consent to become his wife, but on the condition that he should never admit another female to take or share her place, and that she should only be with him in the night time. They took the marriage vow to each other, with none for their witness but God, and great was his happiness, till one evening he saw again, among a group of girls in the river, another who excited in him still more powerful emotions. To his surprise, this very form stood before him at the approach of night. He withstood the temptation, mindful of his marriage vow. She used every allurement, but he was resolute. His fair visitor then told him that she was his wife, that she was a jinniya, and that she would always thenceforward visit him in the form of any females whom he might chance to desire. The Zoba, which is a whirlwind that raises the sand or dust in the form of a pillar of prodigious height, often seen sweeping across the deserts and fields, is believed to be caused by the flight of an evil jinni. To defend themselves from a jinni thus riding in the whirlwind, the Arabs often exclaim, "Iron, iron, hadid, hadid," or "Iron, thou unlucky, hadid, ya mashum," as the jinn are supposed to have a great dread of that metal, or they exclaim, "God is most great, Allahu Akbar." A similar superstition prevails with respect to the water spout at sea, as may be seen in the adventures of King Shahryar in the introduction to the 1001 Nights. It is believed that the chief abode of the jinn is in the mountains of Qaf, which are supposed to encompass the whole of our earth. But they are also believed to pervade the solid body of our earth and the firmament, and to choose as their principal places of resort or of occasional abode baths, wells, ovens, ruined houses, marketplaces, the junctures of roads, the sea, and rivers. The Arabs, therefore, when they pour water on the ground or enter a bath, or let down a bucket into a well, and on various other occasions say, "Permission," or "Permission, ye blessed," "Dastur," or "Dastur, ya Mubarakin." The evil spirits, or evil jinn, it is said, had liberty to enter any of the 7 heavens till the birth of Jesus, when they were excluded from 3 of them. On the birth of Muhammad, they were forbidden the other 4. They continue, however, to ascend to the confines of the lowest heaven, and there listening to the conversation of the angels respecting things decreed by God, obtain knowledge of futurity, which they sometimes impart to men, who by means of talismans or certain invocations make them to serve the purposes of magical performances. What the prophet said of Iblis in the following tradition applies also to the evil jinn over whom he presides. His chief abode among men is the bath. His chief places of resort are the markets and the junctures of roads. His food is whatever is killed without the name of God being pronounced over it. His drink, whatever is intoxicating. His mu'azzan, the mizmar, a musical pipe, it is any musical instrument. His Quran, poetry. His written character, the marks made in geomancy. His speech, falsehood. His snares, women. That particular jinn preside over particular places was an opinion of the early Arabs. It is said in the Quran, "And there were certain men who sought refuge with certain of the jinn." In the commentary of the Jalalain, I find the following remark on these words. When they halted on their journey in a place of fear, each man said, "I seek refuge with the Lord of this place from the mischief of his foolish ones." In illustration of this, I may insert the following tradition, translated from Al-Qazwini. It is related by a certain narrator of traditions that he descended into a valley with his sheep, and a wolf carried off a ewe from among them. And he arose and raised his voice, and cried, "O inhabitant of the valley!" Whereupon he heard a voice saying, "O wolf, restore to him his sheep." And the wolf came with the ewe, and left her and departed. The same opinion is held by the modern Arabs, though probably they do not use such an invocation. A similar superstition, a relic of ancient Egyptian credulity, still prevails among the people of Cairo. It is believed that each quarter of the city has its peculiar guardian genius, or agathodemon, which has the form of a serpent. It has already been mentioned that some of the jinn are Muslims and others infidels. The good jinn acquit themselves of the imperative duties of religion, namely prayers, almsgiving, fasting during the months of Ramadan, and pilgrimage to Mecca and Mount Arafat, but in the performance of these duties they are generally invisible to human beings. It has been stated that by means of talismans or certain invocations, men are said to obtain the services of jinn, and the manner in which the latter are enabled to assist magicians by imparting to them the knowledge of future events has been explained above. No man ever obtained such absolute power over the jinn as Suleiman ibn Daoud, Solomon the son of David. This he did by virtue of a most wonderful talisman, which is said to have come down to him from heaven. It was a seal ring, upon which was engraved the most great name of God, and was partly composed of brass and partly of iron. With the brass he stamped his written commands to the good jinn, with the iron, for the reason mentioned above, page 36, those to the evil jinn, or devils. Over both orders he had unlimited power, as well as over the birds and the winds, and as is generally said, over the wild beasts. His wazir, Asaf, the son of Barkhiyya, is also said to have been acquainted with the most great name, by uttering which the greatest miracles may be performed, even that of raising the dead. By virtue of this name engraved on his ring, Suleiman compelled the jinn to assist in building the Temple of Jerusalem and in various other works. Many of the evil jinn he converted to the true faith, and many others of this class, who remained obstinate in infidelity, he confined in prisons. He is said to have been monarch of the whole earth. Hence, perhaps, the name of Suleiman is given to the universal monarchs of the pre-Adamite jinn, unless the story of his own universal dominion originated from confounding him with those kings. The injuries related to have been inflicted upon human beings by evil jinn are of various kinds. Jinn are said to have often carried off beautiful women, whom they have forcibly kept as their wives or concubines. Malicious or disturbed jinn are asserted often to station themselves on the roofs or at the windows of houses, and to throw down bricks and stones on persons passing by. When they take possession of an uninhabited house, they seldom fail to persecute terribly any person who goes to reside in it. They are also very apt to pilfer provisions, etc. Many learned and devout persons, to secure their property from such depredations, repeat the words, "In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful," on locking the doors of their houses, rooms, or closets, and on covering the bread basket or anything containing food. During the month of Ramadan, the evil jinn are believed to be confined in prison, and therefore on the last night of that month, with the same view, women sometimes repeat the words above mentioned, and sprinkle salt upon the floors of the apartments of their houses. To complete this sketch of Arabian demonology, an account must be added of several creatures generally believed to be of inferior orders of the jinn. One of these is the ghoul, which is commonly regarded as a kind of shaitan or evil jinni that eats men, and is also described by some as a jinni or an enchanter who assumes various forms. The ghouls are said to appear in the forms of human beings and of various animals, and in many monstrous shapes, to haunt burial grounds and other sequestered spots, to feed upon dead human bodies, and to kill and devour any human creature who has the misfortune to fall in their way, whence the term ghoul is applied to any cannibal. An opinion quoted by a celebrated author respecting the ghoul is that it is a demoniacal animal which passes a solitary existence in the deserts, resembling both man and brute, that it appears to a person traveling alone in the night and in solitary places, and being supposed by him to be itself a traveler, lures him out of his way. Another opinion stated by him is this, that when the shaitans attempt to hear words by stealth from the confines of the lowest heaven, they are struck by shooting stars, and some are burnt, some, falling into a sea, or rather a large river, Bahr, are converted into crocodiles, and some, falling upon the land, become ghouls. The same author adds the following tradition. The ghoul is any jinni that is opposed to travels, assuming various forms and appearances, and affirms that several of the companions of the Prophet saw ghouls in their travels, and that Omar among them saw a ghoul while on a journey to Syria before al-Islam and struck it with his sword. It appears that ghoul is, properly speaking, a name only given to a female demon of the kind above described. The male is called Qotrab. It is said that these beings and the Ghadar or the Gharar and other similar creatures which will presently be mentioned are the offspring of Iblis and of a wife whom God created for him of the fire of the Samum, which here signifies, as in an instance before mentioned, a smokeless fire, and that they sprang from an egg. The female ghoul, it is added, appears to men in the deserts in various forms, converses with them, and sometimes yields herself to them. The Se'ala or the Sa'ala is another demoniacal creature described by most authors as of the jinn. It is said that it is mostly found in forests, and that when it captures a man, it makes him dance, and plays with him as the cats play with the mouse. A man of Isfahan asserted that many beings of this kind abounded in his country, that sometimes the wolf would hunt one of them by night and devour it, and that when it had seized it, the Sa'allah would cry out, "Come to my help, for the wolf devoureth me," or it would cry, "Who will liberate me? I have 100 dinars, and he shall receive them." But the people, knowing that it was the cry of the Sa'allah, no one would liberate it. An island in the Sea of El-Sin, China, is called the Island of the Sa'allah by the Arab geographers from its being said to be inhabited by the demons so named. They are described as creatures of hideous forms, supposed to be shaitans, the offspring of human beings and jinn, who eat men. The Ghadar, or Gharar, is another creature of a similar nature, described as being found in the borders of Al-Yemen, and sometimes in Tahama, and in the upper parts of Egypt. It is said that it entices a man to it, and either tortures him in a manner not to be described, or merely terrifies him and leaves him. The Delhan is also a demoniacal being inhabiting the islands of the seas, having the form of a man and riding on an ostrich. It eats the flesh of men whom the sea casts on the shore from wrecks. Some say that a Delhan once attacked a ship in the sea and desired to take the crew, but they contended with it, whereupon it uttered a cry which caused them to fall upon their faces, and it took them. The Shikh is another demoniacal creature, having the form of half a human being, like a man divided longitudinally, and it is believed that the Nesnas is the offspring of a Shikh and of a human being. The former appears to travelers, and it was a demon of this kind who killed and was killed by Alqamah, the son of Safwan, the son of Umayyah, of whom it is well known that he was killed by a jinni. So says Al-Qazwini. The Nesnas above mentioned is described as resembling half a human being, having half a head, half a body, one arm, and one leg, with which it hops with much agility, as being found in the woods of Al-Yemen, and being endowed with speech. But God, it is added, is all-knowing. It is said that it is found in Hadramaut, as well as Al-Yemen, and that one was brought alive to Al-Mutawakkil. It resembled a man in form, excepting that it had but half a face, which was in its breast, and a tail like that of a sheep. The people of Hadramaut, it is added, eat it, and its flesh is sweet. It is only generated in their country. A man who went there asserted that he saw a captured Nesnas, which cried out for mercy, conjuring him by God and by himself. A race of people whose head is in the breast is described as inhabiting an island called Jabba, supposed to be Java, in the Sea of Al-Hind, India. A kind of Nesnas is also described as inhabiting the island of Ra'ich, in the Sea of El-Sin, China, and having wings like those of the bat. The Hatif is a being that is heard but not seen, and is often mentioned by Arab writers. It is generally the communicator of some intelligence in the way of advice, or direction, or warning. Here terminating this chapter, I must beg the reader to remark that the superstitious fancies which it describes are prevalent among all classes of the Arabs and the Muslims in general, learned as well as vulgar. End of Arabian Demonology by Edward William Lane. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Charmed Ring by Joseph Jacobs and John Dixon Batten. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A merchant started his son in life with 300 rupees and bade him go to another country and try his luck in trade. The son took the money and departed. He had not gone far before he came across herdsmen quarreling over a dog that some of them wished to kill. "Please do not kill the dog," pleaded the young and tender-hearted fellow. "I will give you 100 rupees for it." Then and there, of course, the bargain was concluded, and the foolish fellow took the dog and continued his journey. He next met with some people fighting over a cat. Some of them wanted to kill it, but others not. "Oh, please do not kill it," said he. "I will give you 100 rupees for it." Of course they at once gave him the cat and took the money. He went on till he reached a village where some folk were quarreling over a snake that had just been caught. Some of them wished to kill it, but others did not. "Please do not kill the snake," said he. "I will give you 100 rupees. Of course the people agreed, and were highly delighted. What a fool that fellow was! What would he do now that all his money was gone? What could he do except to return to his father? Accordingly, he went home. "You fool! You scamp!" exclaimed his father when he had heard how his son wasted all his money that had been given to him. "Go and live in the stables and repent of your folly. You shall never again enter my house." So the young man went and lived in the stables. His bed was the grass spread for the cattle, and his companions were the dog, the cat, and the snake, which he had purchased so dearly. These creatures got very fond of him, and would follow him about during the day, and sleep by him at night. The cat used to sleep at his feet, and the dog at his head, and the snake over his body, with its head hanging on one side and its tail on the other. One day the snake, in course of conversation, said to its master, "I am the son of Raja Indrasha. One day when I came out of the ground to drink the air, some people seized me, and would have slain me had you not most opportunely arrived to my rescue. I do not know how I shall ever be able to repay you for your great kindness to me. Would that you knew my father, how glad he would be to see his son's preserver." "Where does he live? I should like to see him, if possible," said the young man. "Well said," continued the snake. "Do you see yonder mountain? At the bottom of that mountain there is a sacred spring. If you will come with me and dive into that spring, we shall both reach my father's country. Oh, how glad he will be to see you! He will wish to reward you too, but how can he do that? However, you may be pleased to accept something at his hand. If he asks you what you would like, you would perhaps do well to reply, 'The ring on your right hand and the famous pot and spoon which you possess.' With these in your possession, you would never need anything, for the ring is such that a man only has to speak to it, and immediately a beautiful furnished mansion will be provided for him, while the pot and the spoon will supply him with all manner of the rarest and most delicious foods." Attended by his 3 companions, the man walked to the well and prepared to jump in, according to the snake's directions. "Oh, master!" exclaimed the cat and dog when they saw what he was going to do. "What shall we do? Where shall we go?" "Wait for me here," he replied. "I am not going far. I shall not be long away." On saying this, he dived into the water and was lost to sight. "Now what shall we do?" said the dog to the cat. "We must remain here," replied the cat, "as our master ordered. Do not be anxious about food. I will go to the people's houses and get plenty of food for both of us." And so the cat did, and they both lived very comfortably until their master came again and joined them. The young man and the snake reached their destination in safety, and the information of their arrival was sent to the Raja. His Highness recommended his son and the stranger to appear before him, but the snake refused, saying that it could not go to its father until it was released from the stranger, who had saved him from the most terrible death, and whose slave it therefore was. Then the Raja went and embraced his son, and saluting the stranger, welcomed him to his dominions. The young man stayed there for a few days, during which he received the Raja's right-hand ring and the pot and spoon, in recognition of his Highness's gratitude to him for having delivered his son. He then returned. On reaching the top of the spring, he found his friends, the dog and the cat, waiting for him. They told one another all they had experienced since they had last seen each other, and they were all very glad. Afterwards, they walked together to the riverside, where it was decided to try the powers of the charmed ring and the pot and the spoon. The merchant's son spoke to the ring, and immediately a beautiful house and a lovely princess with golden hair appeared. He spoke to the pot and spoon also, and the most delicious dishes of food were provided for them. So he married the princess, and they lived very happily for several years, until one morning the princess, while arranging her toilet, put the loose hairs into a hollow bit of reed and threw them into the river that flowed along under the window. The reed floated on the water for many miles, and was at last picked up by the prince of the country, who curiously opened it and saw the golden hair. On finding it, the prince rushed off to the palace, locked himself up in a room, and would not leave it. He had fallen desperately in love with the woman whose hair he had picked up, and refused to eat or drink or sleep or move till he was brought to him. The king, his father, was in great distress about the matter, and did not know what to do. He feared lest his son should die and leave him without an heir. At last he determined to seek the counsel of his aunt, who was an ogress. The old woman consented to help him, and bade him not to be anxious, as she felt certain that she would succeed in getting the beautiful woman for his son's wife. She assumed the shape of a bee and went along buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. Her keen sense of smell soon brought her to the beautiful princess, whom she appeared as an old hag, holding in one hand a stick by way of support. She introduced herself to the beautiful princess and said, "I am your aunt, whom you have never seen before, because I left the country just after your birth." She also embraced and kissed the princess by way of adding force to her words. The beautiful princess was thoroughly deceived. She returned the ogress's embrace, and invited her to come and stay in the house as long as she could, and treated her with such honor and attention that the ogress thought to herself, "I shall soon accomplish my errand." When she had been in the house 3 days, she began to talk of the charmed ring, and advised her to keep it instead of her husband, because the latter was constantly out shooting and on other such-like expeditions, and might lose it. Accordingly, the beautiful princess asked her husband for the ring, and he readily gave it to her. The ogress waited another day before she asked to see the precious thing. Doubting nothing, the beautiful princess complied. When the ogress seized the ring, and resuming the form of a bee, flew away with it to the palace, where the prince was lying nearly on the point of death. "Rise up, be glad, mourn no more," she said to him. "The woman for whom you yearn will appear at your summons. See, here is the charm whereby you may bring her before you." The prince was almost mad with joy when he heard these words, and was so desirous of seeing the beautiful princess that he immediately spoke to the ring, and the house with its fair occupant descended in the midst of the palace garden. He at once entered the building, and telling the beautiful princess of his intense love, entreated her to become his wife. Seeing no escape from the difficulty, she consented on the condition that he would wait 1 month for her. Meanwhile, the merchant's son had returned from hunting and was terribly distressed not to find his house and wife. There was the place only, just as he knew it before he had tried the charmed ring which Raja Indrisha had given him. He sat down and determined to put an end to himself. Presently the cat and dog came up. They had gone away and hidden themselves, when they saw the house and everything disappear. "Oh, master," they said, "stay your hand. Your trial is great, but it can be remedied. Give us 1 month, and we will go and try to recover your wife and house." "Go," said he, "and may the great God aid your efforts. Bring back my wife, and I shall live." So the cat and dog started off at a run, and did not stop till they reached the palace whither their mistress and the house that had been taken. "We may have some difficulty here," said the cat. "Look, the king has taken our master's wife and house for himself. You stay here. I will go to the house and try to see her." So the dog sat down, and the cat climbed up to the window of the room wherein the beautiful princess was sitting, and entered. The princess recognized the cat, and informed it of all that had happened since she had left them. "But is there no way of escape from the hands of these people?" she asked. "Yes," replied the cat, "if you can tell me where the charmed ring is." "The ring is in the stomach of the ogress," she said. "All right," said the cat, "I will recover it. Once we get it, everything is ours." Then the cat descended the wall of the house, and went and lay down by the rat's hole and pretended she was dead. Now at the time a great wedding chanced to be going on among the rat community of that place, and all the rats of the neighborhood were assembled in that one particular mine by which the cat had lain down. The eldest son of the king of rats was about to be married. The cat got to know of this, and at once conceived the idea of seizing the bridegroom and making him render the necessary help. Consequently, when the procession poured forth from the hole, squealing and jumping in honor of the occasion, it immediately spotted the bridegroom and pounced down on him. "Oh, let me go," cried the terrified rat. "Oh, let him go," squealed all the company. "It is his wedding day." "No, no," replied the cat, "not unless you do something for me. Listen, the ogress who lives in that house with the prince and his wife has swallowed a ring, which I very much want. If you will procure it for me, I will allow the rat to depart unharmed. If you do not, then your prince dies under my feet." "Very well, we agree," said they all. "Nay, if we do not get the ring for you, devour us all." This was rather a bold offer. However, they accomplished the thing. At midnight, when the ogress was sound asleep, one of the rats went to her bedside, climbing up on her face, and inserted his tail into her throat, whereupon the ogress coughed violently, and the ring came out and rolled onto the floor. The rat immediately seized the precious thing and ran off with it to its king, who was very glad, and went at once to the cat and released its son. As soon as the cat received the ring, she started back with the dog to go and tell their master the good tidings. All seemed safe now. They had only to give the ring to him, and he would speak to it, and the house and the beautiful princess would again be with them, and everything would go on as happily as before. "How glad the master will be," they thought, and ran as fast as their legs could carry them. Now, on the way they had to cross a stream. The dog swam, and the cat sat on his back. Now the dog was jealous of the cat, so he asked for the ring and threatened to throw the cat into the water if it did not give it up, whereupon the cat gave up the ring. Sorry moment, for the dog at once dropped it, and a fish swallowed it. "Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?" said the dog. "What is done, replied the cat. "We must try to recover it, and if we do not succeed, we had better drown ourselves in the stream. I have a plan. You go and kill a small lamb, and bring it here to me." "All right," said the dog, and at once ran off. He soon came back with a dead lamp and gave it to the cat. The cat got inside the lamp and lay down, telling the dog to go away a little distance and keep quiet. Not long after this nadhar, a bird whose look can break the bones of a fish came and hovered over the lamp and eventually pounced down on it to carry it away. On this, the cat had came out and jumped onto the bird and threatened to kill it if it did not recover the lost ring. And this was most readily promised by the nadhar, who immediately flew off to the king of the fishes and ordered it to make inquiries and restore the ring. The king of the fishes did so, and the ring was found and carried back to the cat. "Come along now, I've got the ring," said the cat to the dog. "No, I will not," said the dog, "unless you let me have the ring. I can carry it as well as you. Let me have it or I will kill you." So the cat was obliged to give up the ring. The careless dog very soon dropped it again. This time it was picked up and carried off by a kite. See, there it goes, away to that big tree," the cat exclaimed. Oh, what have I done?" cried the dog. "You foolish thing. I knew it would be so," said the cat. "But stop your barking, or you will frighten away the bird to some place we shall not be able to trace it." The cat waited until it was quite dark, and then climbed the tree, killed the kite, and recovered the ring. "Come along," it said to the dog when it reached the ground. "We must make haste now. We have been delayed. Our master will die from grief and suspense. Come on." The dog, now thoroughly ashamed of itself, begged the cat's pardon for all the trouble it had given. It was afraid to ask for the ring for the third time, so they both reached their sorrowing master in safety and gave him the precious charm. In a moment his sorrow was turned into joy. He spoke to the ring, and his beautiful wife and house reappeared, and he and everyone were as happy as they could ever be. End of The Charmed Ring by Joseph Jacobs and John Dixon Batten. Read by Prisha Goyal.
Diplomacy by Lafcadio Hearn. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Diplomacy. It had been ordered that the execution should take place in the garden of the Yashiki. Note: the spacious house and grounds of a wealthy person is thus called. End of note. So the man was taken there and made to kneel down in a wide sanded space crossed by a line of tobi-ishi or stepping stones, such as you may see in Japanese landscape gardens. His arms were bound behind him. Retainers brought water in buckets and rice bags filled with pebbles, and they packed the rice bags around the kneeling man, so wedging him in that he could not move. The master came and observed the arrangements. He found them satisfactory and made no remarks. Suddenly the condemned man cried out to him, "Honored sir, the fault for which I have been doomed I did not wittingly commit. It was only my very great stupidity which caused the fault. Having been born stupid by reason of my karma, I could not always help making mistakes. But to kill a man for being stupid is wrong, and that wrong will be repaid. So surely as you kill me, so surely shall I be avenged. Out of the resentment that you provoke will come the vengeance, and evil will be rendered for evil. If any person be killed while feeling strong resentment, the ghost of that person will be able to take vengeance upon the killer." This the samurai knew. He replied very gently, almost caressingly, "We shall allow you to frighten us as much as you please after you are dead, but it is difficult to believe that you mean what you say. Will you try to give us some sign of your great resentment after your head has been cut off?" "Assuredly I will," answered the man. "Very well," said the samurai, drawing his long sword. "I'm now going to cut off your head. Directly in front of you there's a stepping stone. After your head has been cut off, try to bite the stepping stone. If your angry ghost can help you to do that, some of us may be frightened. Will you try to bite the stone?" "I will bite it," cried the man in great anger. "I will bite it. I will bite—" There was a flash, a swish, a crunching thud. The bound body bowed over the rice sacks, 2 long blood jets pumping from the shorn neck, and the head rolled upon the sand. Heavily toward the stepping stone it rolled. Then, suddenly bounding, it caught the upper edge of the stone between its teeth, clung desperately for a moment, and dropped inert. None spoke, but the retainers stared in horror at their master. He seemed to be quite unconcerned. He merely held out his sword to the nearest attendant, who with a wooden dipper poured water over the blade from haft to point, and then carefully wiped the steel several times with sheets of soft paper. And thus ended the ceremonial part of the incident. For months thereafter, the retainers and the domestics lived in ceaseless fear of ghostly visitation. None of them doubted that the promised vengeance would come, and their constant terror caused them to hear and to see much that did not exist. They became afraid of the sound of the wind in the bamboos, afraid even of the stirring of shadows in the garden. At last, after taking counsel together, they decided to petition their master to have a sagaki service, note, a Buddhist service for the dead, end of note, performed on behalf of the vengeful spirit. Quite unnecessary, the samurai said, when his chief retainer had uttered the general wish. I understand that the desire of a dying man for revenge may be a cause for fear, but in this case there is nothing to fear. The retainer looked at his master beseechingly, but hesitated to ask the reason of the alarming confidence. Oh, the reason is simple enough, declared the samurai, divining the unspoken doubt. Only the very last intention of the fellow could have been dangerous, and when I challenged him to give me the sign, I diverted his mind from the desire of revenge. He died with the set purpose of biting the stepping stone, and that purpose he was able to accomplish, but nothing else. All the rest he must have forgotten, so you need not feel any further anxiety about the matter. And indeed, the dead man gave no more trouble. Nothing at all happened. End of Diplomacy by Lafcadio Hearn. Read by Colleen McMahon.
The Giant Maiden, retold by Marie H. Frary and Charles M. Stebbins. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Many years ago, there lived a mighty race of giants. They were as tall as the hills and dwelt in great castles as large as mountains. To them, the world was a very small place indeed. These giants loved the world, however, and all the many beautiful things in it. The sunshine, the song of birds, the green fields, the woods, the rivers, and the blue sky were all charming to them. So it was that they used to walk a great deal. They used to go everywhere and see everything that was good to see. When they walked, however, they stepped from hilltop to hilltop. They never went down into the valleys. The king of the giants was a great and a good man. He was kind to his people and kind to his children, and they all loved and honored him. One of his children was a beautiful girl. She would soon be a woman, but she still loved playthings. Like the rest of the giants, Hilda, the king's daughter, liked to go walking out into the world. She often found most interesting playthings. Sometimes she would bring home a bear or a baby elephant. One day, Hilda went out for a walk. She had had to stay in the castle for several days because of the rain. This was a beautiful day, however, and she walked a long way, even for a giant's daughter. The maiden stepped over valley after valley, from hilltop to hilltop, till she was far away from home. She had never gone so far before. The country seemed quite different, and it was pleasant too. At last she stopped and looked about her to enjoy the scene. Before her was a wide valley, and in it she saw many curious things. One of them was a man plowing with horses. She had never seen anything like that before. "Oh," she cried, "what cute playthings they will make! They will be real live playthings too. How nice the little creature is that walks behind! And the thing he is holding, that will make a fine toy. And the other animals will be such lovely pets. I must have them all." Hilda reached down into the valley and picked up the man, the plow, and the horses and tucked them away in her apron. Then she went home to tell her father. "See what lovely playthings I have found," she called to him as she ran into the great castle. "My darling child," said the good king, "these are not playthings. You must take them back and leave them where you found them. You must never touch them again. This is a man, and he has a wife and children at home.
They will be very sad if he does not come back to them. By and by, he went on, the whole world will be owned by little creatures like this man, and we shall be no more. The king's daughter was very sad when she heard these things. She did not want to give up such delightful playthings. But she had a kind heart, and she loved her father. She knew, too, that he understood things much better than she did. So she put the man, the plough, and the horses into her apron again, and took them back to the place where she had found them. The man was very happy when she set him down in the field again. His good wife and his children were there too, and they rejoiced to see him again. They feared something had happened to him. The maiden looked on for a time, wondering about it all. It made her glad to see how happy the man and his wife and children were. She was no longer sorry that she had given up her playthings, and she went home with a light heart. End of The Giant Maiden, retold by Marie H. Frary and Charles M. Stebbins.
The Lady of the Fountain, from Stories from Le Morte d'Arthur and the Mabinogion, retold by Beatrice Clay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Lady of the Fountain. King Arthur was holding his court at Caerleon upon Usk, and it was the time of the evening banquet, where there entered the hall the good knight Sir Kynon. A brave warrior was he, and of good counsel, but he seemed in weary plight, as, after due salutation to all, he took his place at the round table. So it was that all were eager to hear of his adventure, yet none would question him until he had eaten and drunk. But when he was refreshed, the king said to him, "Whence come ye, Sir Kynon? For it would seem that ye have met with hard adventure." "Sir King," answered Kynon, "it has been with me as never before, for I have encountered with, and been overthrown by, a single knight." All were filled with wonder at his words, for never before had Sir Kynon been worsted in any meeting, man to man. Then said the king, "The stoutest of us must sometime meet his match, yet did ye bear you valiantly, I doubt not. Tell us now, I pray you, of your adventures." "Noble lord," said Kynon, "I had determined to journey into other lands, for I would seek new and untried adventures. So I passed into a far land, and it chanced, one day, that I found myself in the fairest valley I had ever seen. Through it there flowed a mighty river, which I followed, until I came, as evening fell, to a castle, the largest and strongest I have ever seen. At the castle gate I espied a man of right noble mien, who greeted me courteously, and bade me enter. So as we sat at supper, he inquired of my journey and the quest I followed, and I told him how I sought but adventure, and whether, perchance, I might encounter one stronger than myself. Then the lord of the castle smiled and said, "I can bring to you such an one, if ye would rather that I showed you your disadvantage than your advantage." And when I questioned him further, he replied, "Sleep here this night, and tomorrow I will show you such an one as ye seek." So I rested that night, and with the dawn I rose and took my leave of the lord of the castle, who said to me, "If ye will persevere in your quest, follow the path to the head of the glade, and ascend the wooded steep until you come to an open space in the forest, with but one great tree in its midst. Under the tree is a fountain, and beside it a marble slab, to which is chained a silver bowl. Take a bowl full of water, and dash it upon the slab, and presently there will appear a knight spurring to encounter with you. If ye flee, he will pursue, but if ye overcome him, there exists none in this world whom ye need fear to have ado with." Forthwith I departed, and following these directions, I came at last to such a space as he described, with the tree and the fountain in its midst. So I took the bowl, and dashed water from the fountain upon the marble slab, and on the instant came a clap of thunder so loud as near deafened me, and a storm of hailstones, the biggest that ever man saw. Scarce was I recovered from my confusion when I saw a knight galloping towards me. All in black was he, and he rode a black horse. Not a word we spoke, but we dashed against each other, and at the first encounter I was unhorsed. Still not a word spoke the Black Knight, but passing the butt end of his lance through my horse's reins, rode away, leaving me shamed and on foot. So I made my way back to the castle, and there I was entertained again that night right hospitably, none questioning me as to my adventure. The next morning, when I rose, there awaited me a noble steed, ready saddled and bridled, and I rode away, and am returned hither. And now you know my story and my shame. Then were all grieved for the discomfiture of Sir Kynon, who had ever borne himself boldly and courteously to all, and they strove to console him as best they might. Presently there rose from his siege the good knight Sir Owen of Reged, and said, My lord, I pray you, give me leave to take upon me this adventure, for I would gladly seek this wondrous fountain and encounter with this same Black Knight. So the king consented, and on the morrow Sir Owen armed him, mounted his horse, and rode forth the way Sir Kynon had directed him. So he journeyed many a day, until at last he reached the valley of which Sir Kynon had told, and presently he came to the strong castle, and, at the gate, met the lord thereof, even as Sir Kynon had done. And the lord of the castle gave him a hearty welcome, and made him good cheer, asking nothing of his errand till they were seated about the board. Then, when questioned, Sir Owen declared his quest, that he sought the knight who guarded the fountain. So the lord of the castle, failing to dissuade Sir Owen from the adventure, directed him how he might find the forest glade wherein was the wondrous fountain. With the dawn, Sir Owen rose, mounted his horse, and rode forward until he had found the fountain. Then he dashed water on the marble slab, and instantly there burst over him the fearful hailstorm, and through it there came pricking towards him the Black Knight on the black steed. In the first onset they broke their lances, and then, drawing sword, they fought blade to blade. Sore was the contest, but at the last Owen dealt the Black Knight so fierce a blow that the sword cut through helmet and bone to the very brain. Then the Black Knight knew that he had got his death wound, and turning his horse's head, fled as fast as he might, Sir Owen following close behind. So they came, fast galloping, to the gate of a mighty castle, and instantly the portcullis was raised, and the Black Knight dashed through the gateway. But Sir Owen, following close behind, found himself a prisoner, fast caught between two gates. For as the Black Knight passed through the inner of the two gates, it was closed before Sir Owen could follow. For the moment, none noticed Sir Owen, for all were busied about the Black Knight, who drew not rein till he was come to the castle hall. Then, as he strove to dismount, he fell from his saddle, dead. All this Sir Owen saw through the bars of the gate that held him prisoner, and he judged that his time was come, for he doubted not but that the people of the castle would hold his life forfeit for the death of their lord. So as he waited, suddenly there stood at his side a fair damsel, who, laying finger on lip, motioned him to follow her. Much wondering, he obeyed, and climbed after her up a dark, winding staircase that led from the gateway into a tiny chamber high in the tower. There she set food and wine before him, bidding him eat. Then when he was refreshed, she asked him his name and whence he came. Truly, answered he, I am Owen of Reged, knight of King Arthur's Round Table, who, in fair fight, have wounded, I doubt not to the death, the Black Knight that guards the fountain, and, as I suppose, the lord of this castle. Wherefore, maiden, if ye intend me evil, lead me where I may answer for my deed, boldly, man to man. Nay, answered the damsel eagerly, in a good hour ye are come. Well I know your name, for even here have we heard of your mighty deeds, and by good fortune it may be that ye shall release my lady. Who is your lady? asked Sir Owen. None other than the rightful chatelaine of this castle, and countess of broad lands besides. But this year, and more, has the Black Knight held her prisoner in her own halls, because she would not listen to his suit. Then lead me to your lady forthwith, cried Sir Owen. Right gladly will I take her quarrel upon me, if there be any that will oppose me. So she led him to the Countess's bower, and there he made him known to the fair lady, and proffered her his services. And she that had long deemed there was no deliverance for her, accepted them right gladly. So, taking her by the hand, he led her down to the hall, and there, standing at the door, he proclaimed her the lawful lady of that castle and all its lands, and himself ready to do battle in her cause. But none answered his challenge, for those that had held with the Black Knight, deprived of their leader, had lost heart, whereas they that for their loyalty to their lady had been held in subjection, gathered fast about Sir Owen, ready to do battle. So in short space, Sir Owen drove forth the lawless invaders of the Countess's lands, and called together her vassals, that they might do homage to her anew. Thus he abode in the castle many days, seeking in all that he might to do her service, until through all her lands order was restored, and her right acknowledged. But when all was done, Sir Owen yet tarried in the lady's castle, for he loved her much, but doubted ever of her favour. So, one day, Luned, the damsel, who had come to his aid on the day that he slew the Black Knight, said to him, Alas, Sir Knight, the time must come when ye will leave us, and who will then defend my lady's fountain, which is the key to all her lands? For who holds the fountain holds the land also. I will never fail your lady while there is breath in my body, cried Sir Owen. Then were it well that ye stayed here ever, answered Luned. Gladly would I, answered Sir Owen, if that I might. Ye might find a way if your wits were as sharp as your sword, she answered, and laughing, left him, but herself sought her lady. Long he pondered her words, and he was still deep in thought, when there came to him the Countess, and said, Sir Knight, I hear that ye must leave us. Nay, my lady, answered Sir Owen, I will stay as long as ye require my services. There must ever be one to guard the fountain, and he who guards the fountain is lord of these lands, answered the lady softly. Then Sir Owen found words at last, and bending the knee, he said, Lady, if ye love me, I will stay and guard you and your lands, and if ye love me not, I will go into my own country, and yet will I come again whensoever ye have need of me, for never loved I any but you. Then the Countess bade him stay, and calling her vassals together, she commanded all to do homage to him, and took him for her husband in presence of them all. Thus Sir Owen won the Lady of the Fountain. End of The Lady of the Fountain, retold by Beatrice Clay. Read by John Pederson.
Legend of the Mulata de Cordoba by Thomas Alabon Hanvier. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It is well known, Señor, that this Mulata of Cordoba, being a very beautiful woman, was in close touch with the devil. She dwelt in Cordoba, the town not far from Vera Cruz, where coffee and very good mangoes are grown. And she was born so long ago that the very oldest man now living was not then alive. No one knew who was her father, or who was her mother, or where she came from. So she was called La Mulata de Cordoba, and that was all. One of the wonders of her was that the years passed her without marking her, and she never grew old. She led a very good life, helping everyone who was in trouble and giving food to the hungry ones, and she dressed in modest clothes simply, and always was most neat and clean. She was a very wicked witch, and beyond that nobody really knew anything about her at all. On the same day and at the same hour, she would be seen by different people in different places widely apart, as here in the city and in Cordoba and elsewhere variously, all in precisely the same moment of time. She also was seen flying through the air high above the roofs of the houses, with sparks flashing from her black eyes. Moreover, every night the devil visited her, as was known generally, because at night her neighbors observed that through the chinks in the tight-shut doors and windows of her house there shone a bright light, as though all the inside of the house were filled with flames. She went to Mass regularly, and at the proper seasons partook of the sacrament. She disdained everybody, and because of her disdainings it was believed that the master of her beauty was the Lord of Darkness, and that seemed reasonable. Every single one of the young men was mad about her, and she had a train of lovers from which she could pick and choose. All wonders were told of her. She was so powerful and could work such prodigies that she was spoken about, just as though she had been the blessed Santa Rita de Cassia, as the advocate of impossible things. Old maids went to her, who sought for husbands. Poor ladies who longed for jewels and fine dresses that they might go to the court of the viceroy. Miners that they might find silver. Old soldiers set aside for rustiness to get new commands, so that the saying, "I am not the Mulata of Cordoba," is the answer when anyone asks an impossible favor, even now. How it came about, Señor, no one ever knew. What everyone did know was that on a day the Mulata was brought from Cordoba here to the city and was cast into the prison of the Holy Office. That was a piece of news that made a stir. Some said that a disdained lover had denounced her to the Inquisition. Others said that the Holy Office had laid hands on her less because she was a witch than because of her great riches, and it was told that when she had been seized 10 barrels filled with gold dust had been seized with her. So talk about the matter was on every tongue. Many years went by, Señor, and all of that talk was almost forgotten. Then on a morning the city was astonished by hearing, no one knew from where, that at the next auto de fe the witch of Cordoba would walk with the unredeemed ones, carrying the flameless green candle and wearing the high bonnet, and would be burned at the burning place of the Holy Office. It was in front of the church of San Diego, Señor, at the western end of what now is the Alameda, and so would have burned out of her sins. And before that astonishment was ended, there came another and a greater, when it was told that the witch, before the very eyes of her jailers, had escaped from the prison of the Inquisition and was gone free. All sorts of stories flew about the city. One said, crossing himself, that her friend the devil had helped her to her freedom. Another said that inquisitors also were of flesh and blood, and that she had been freed by her own beauty. Men talked at random, because neither then nor later did anybody know what really had happened. But what really did happen, Señor, was this. On a day, the chief inquisitor went into the prison of the Mulata, that he might reason her to repentance. And being come into her prison, it was a long and lofty chamber that they had put her into, Señor, not one of the bad small cells. He stopped short in amazement, beholding before him, drawn with charcoal on the wall of the chamber, a great ship that lacked not a single rope, nor a single sail, nor anything whatever that a ship requires. While he stood gazing at that ship, wondering, the Mulata turned to him and looked strangely at him out of her wicked black eyes, and said in a tone of railing, "Holy Father, what does this ship need to make it perfect?" And to that he answered, "Unhappy woman, it is thou who needest much to make thee perfect, that thou mayest be cleansed of thy sins. As for this ship, it is in all other ways so wholly perfect that it needs only to sail." Then said the Mulata, "That it shall do, and very far." And there was on her face, as she spoke to him, a most wicked smile. With astonishment he looked at her and at the ship. "How can that be possible?" he asked. "In this manner," she answered, and as she spoke, she leaped lightly from the floor of the prison to the deck of the ship, up there on the wall, and stood with her hand upon the tiller at the ship's stern. Then happened, Señor, a very wonderful marvel. Suddenly the sails of the ship filled and bellied out as though a strong wind were blowing. And then before the eyes of the Inquisitor, the ship went sailing away along the wall of the chamber, the Mulata laughing wickedly as she swung the tiller and steered it upon its course. Slowly it went at first, and then more and more rapidly, until being come to the wall at the end of the chamber, it sailed right on into and through the solid stone and mortar, the Mulata still laughing wickedly as she stood there steering at the ship's stern. And then the wall closed whole and solid again behind the ship, and only a little echoing sound of that wicked laughter was heard in the chamber, and the ship had vanished, and the Mulata was out of her prison and gone. The Inquisitor, Señor, who had seen this devil's miracle, immediately lost all his senses and became a madman, and was put into a madhouse, where till death gave peace to him, he raved always of a beautiful woman in a great ship that sailed through stone walls and across the solid land. As for the Mulata, nothing more ever was heard of her, but it was generally known that her master, the devil, had claimed her for his own. This story is entirely true, Señor, as is proved by the fact that the Inquisition building, in which all these wonders happened, still is standing. It is the Escuela de Medicina now. End of the Legend of the Mulata de Cordoba by Thomas Alibon Hanvier, read by Anita Sloma-Martinez.
Loke's Wolf, edited by Mara L. Pratt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Although the apples of life had been brought back, and although Loke appeared for some time very pertinent and willing to obey the laws of the kind Odin, the gods had little faith in him. More than that, so much had they suffered that now they were in constant fear of him. We never know, Pete, Freyja, and Sif, and Aiden, all of whom had good reasons to fear him, what mischief he may be planning. And so it came about that Loki was driven forth from Asgard, as indeed he deserved to be. Straight to the home of the giants Loki went. He always had been a giant at heart, the evil creature, and was much more in harmony with them in their thoughts and acts than ever he had been with the gods whom he claimed as his people. But now that he was cast out from Asgard and could no longer share its beauties and joys, he had but one wish, that was, to be revenged upon the gods, to destroy them and to ruin their golden city. To do this, he raised two dreadful creatures, terrible monsters. Even the gods shuddered as they looked upon them. Loki, Loki, thundered Odin, looking down upon him in wrath that he should dare such vengeance. But Loki stood defiant. There was but one thing to be done, so the gods thought, and that was to take these terrible creatures from Loki's power. The serpent we will cast into the sea, said Thor. But the wolf, what shall we do with the wolf? Certainly he cannot be left to wander up and down in Midgard. The sea would not hold him. Loki must not have him in Jotunheim. What shall be done with him? Kill him, said some. No, Odin answered. To him Loki has given the gift of everlasting life. He will not die as long as we, the gods, have life. There is but one way left open to us, and that is to bring the wolf into Asgard. Here we can wash him and keep him from much, if not all the evil he would do. And so the wolf, the Fenris wolf he was called, was brought into the home of the gods. He was a dreadful creature to look upon. His eyes were like balls of fire, and his fangs were white and sharp and cruel. Every day he grew more terrible. Fiercer and fiercer he grew, and larger and stronger and more dreadful to look upon. "What has to be done with him?" asked Odin one day, his face white with despair, as he looked upon the wolf and realized what sorrow by and by he would bring among them. "Kill him," cried one. "Send him to Jotunheim," cried another. "Chain him," thundered Thor, and indeed to chain him seemed really the only thing that could be done with him. "We will make the chains this night," said Thor, and at once the great forge was set in motion. All night long Thor worked the forge, hammering with his mighty hammer the links that should make a chain to hold the Fenris wolf. Morning came. The gods were filled with hope as they saw the great heap of iron. "Now we shall be safe. Now we shall be free," they said, "for no creature living can break the irons that the god of thunder forges." The wolf growled and showed his wicked teeth as Thor approached and threw the chain about him. He knew the gods hated him and feared him. He knew, too, that with his wondrous strength, even the chains of Thor were not too strong for him to break. So snarling and showing his fangs and lashing his tail, he allowed himself to be bound. "They are afraid of me," the cruel wolf grinned. "And well, they may be. There is a power in me that even they do not yet dream of." The chains were tightly fastened, and the gods waited eagerly for the wolf to test his strength with them. Now the wolf knew well enough that there were no chains that could hold him. "I will amuse myself," said he to himself, "by tormenting the gods." So he glared at the chains with his fiery eyes, sniffed here and there at them, lifted one paw and then the other, bit at them with his sharp teeth and clawed at them with his strong claws, setting up now and then a howl that echoed like the thunders of Thor from cloud to cloud across the skies. The faces of the gods grew brighter and brighter. They looked at each other and hope rose high in their hearts. "We are saved," they whispered to each other. "Hear how he howls. He knows he cannot break chains forged in the smithy of the mighty Thor." But Odin did not smile. He knew only too well that the wolf was amusing himself, and that when the gods were least expecting it, he would spring forth and shatter the links of the mighty chain, even as a mortal might shatter a chain of straw. "Conquered at last, you cruel Fenris wolf," thundered Thor, lifting his hammer in scorn to throw at the helpless wolf. "The Fenris wolf is never conquered," hissed the wolf, and with one bound he leaped across the walls of Asgard down across the skies to Midgard. The links of the chain scattered like sparks of fire as he flew through the air. "See, see!" cried the people of Midgard as they saw the fiery eyes of Fenris gleam across the sky. "See, a star has fallen! A star has fallen into the sea!" For the people of Midgard cannot understand the wonders of the heavens and the mysteries of the gods. The gods stood wonderstruck. Their faces were pale with fright. The brow of Thor grew black and stern. Odin looked pityingly upon them all. "Lose not your courage," said he kindly. "The Fenris wolf shall yet be bound, and there shall yet remain to us ages upon ages of happiness and freedom from his wicked power. Go now to the dwarfs who work their forges in the great mines beneath the mountains of Midgard. They shall make for you a magic chain that even Fenris cannot break." Hardly were the words out of Odin's mouth when Thor set forth upon the wings of his own lightning, to the home of the dwarfs, to do the bidding of Odin, the All-Wise. End of Loki's Wolf, edited by Mara L. Pratt.
The Magic Ring, retold by Marie H. Freary and Charles M. Stebbins. Read by Mack Hopper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Charlemagne was King of France and Emperor of Germany. He had married a beautiful Eastern princess whose name was Frustrada. His love for her was so great that his only thought was to give her happiness. All wondered at his devotion, but none suspected the cause. Frustrada had a wonderful gold ring. On it were inscribed mystic signs. Frustrada wore the ring continually, and it was this magic talisman that had worked such a charm. But the new queen did not long enjoy her power. A great illness overtook her. During this time she thought often of the magic treasure and feared it would pass into other hands. So she slipped the ring from her finger into her mouth and quietly breathed her last. The emperor was quite overcome with grief. He refused to have the queen taken to the cathedral, but stayed constantly by her side. In vain the councillors and courtiers pled with him. In vain Turpin, the prime minister, told him that the people had need of him. He refused to leave the chamber where the queen lay, or to partake of food. At last he fell asleep at his post. Turpin felt convinced that the queen possessed some charm, so he stole noiselessly to her bedside. After some time he found the ring. He concealed it in his own clothing, and sat down to wait for Charlemagne to awaken. Soon the emperor opened his eyes. He turned from the queen with a shudder. "Turpin, my faithful friend," he cried, as he threw himself in the arms of the prime minister, "your presence is like balm to my wounded heart. You shall remain by my side forever." From that time on, Turpin was forced to accompany Charlemagne wherever he went. The courtiers wondered at Turpin's influence. Many of them were quite jealous. As for poor Turpin, he was wearied beyond all expression. He could find no rest either by night or by day. Vainly he sought for some plan by which he might rid himself of the troublesome gem. At length it happened that Charlemagne and Turpin set out from the palace of Ingelheim on a journey to the north. They camped one night in a great forest. While his master lay asleep, Turpin left the camp and wandered out into the moonlight alone. Not once before, since he had found the ring, had he been free from the emperor. His heart swelled with a feeling of relief as he plunged into the pathless forest. On and on he wandered, trying to think of some way to rid himself of the troublesome ring. Like Frustrada, he did not want anyone else to come into possession of it, and thus get such an influence over the emperor. After long wandering, he found himself at the opening of a beautiful glade. Before him lay a quiet pool, embosomed in the dark woods. The moonlight flooded the retired spot and shone like silver over the deep and quiet waters. Turpin was lost in admiration. He sat down on a stone and feasted his eyes in silence on the peaceful beauty of the scene. Soon the thought of the magic ring came to disturb his happiness. "What shall I do with it?" he groaned. He drew it from its hiding place in his breast and examined it closely. "Ah!" he muttered, "what is this I see?" He noticed by the pale light of the moon that the ring bore something else beside the strange signs. On it was the image of a tiny swan. He looked at it in amazement, for he had never seen the swan before. He started up, then stopped suddenly. Why not? He asked himself. Those deep and quiet waters would soon close over and conceal the ring forever. A moment later the jewel flashed beneath the rays of the moon. A slight splash was borne along by the night air. Ever-widening ripples broke the mirror-like surface of the pool. In the distance a snowy swan appeared, sailing with stately calm over the ruffled waters. Delighted to be rid of the hateful jewel, Turpin now made his way back to the tent. Charlemagne was awake and greeted him as in the days of old. The charm was broken. The morning sun rose bright and clear. The emperor, however, became restless. He proposed that they tarry in the spot another day and hunt in the forest. Turpin agreed, and soon the forest echoes were awakened by the clangor of the hunting horns. A royal stag was started from covert. Closely the huntsmen and hounds followed it. At last, panting and exhausted, it was brought to bay in a remote glade. the very place which Turpin had visited the night before. Charlemagne had been foremost in the chase all the morning. Now he sat motionless in his saddle, gazing in spellbound admiration at the sunny stretch of water. He observed the reflection of the blue sky and the swans gliding over its smooth surface. "Ah, how beautiful!" he exclaimed. "I would fain linger here forever." Then he dismounted and threw himself down upon the smooth grass by the edge of the pool. There he remained in a dreamy content all day long. At last the shadows began to lengthen. The glow of the setting sun was reflected in the miniature lake. Charlemagne was so enchanted with the scene that he vowed to build a castle there. The vow was kept, and the structure that arose was the beginning of Charlemagne's capital and favorite city, Aix-la-Chapelle. When many years had passed, death came to the great emperor. He was laid at rest in the cathedral vault, not far from the spot he loved so well. Strangers visiting Aix-la-Chapelle were told not to visit the magic pool by moonlight. At the mystic hour when Turpin dropped the ring into the quiet waters, the spell recovers all its former powers. Accordingly, should anyone visit it at that time, his longing heart would always lead him back to the charmed spot, however far away he might be wandering in the wide world. End of The Magic Ring, retold by Marie H. Frary and Charles M. Stebbins.
The Ogre of Rashomon, from Japanese Fairy Tales by Yae Theodora Ozaki. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Long, long ago in Kyoto, the people of the city were terrified by accounts of a dreadful ogre who, it was said, haunted the gates of Rashomon at twilight and seized whoever passed by. The missing victims were never seen again, so it was whispered that the ogre was a horrible cannibal who not only killed the unhappy victims, but ate them also. Now everybody in the town and neighborhood was in great fear, and no one durst venture out after sunset near the gate of Rashomon. Now at this time there lived in Kyoto a general named Reiko, who had made himself famous for his brave deeds. Some time before this he made the country ring with his name, for he had attacked Oyama, where a band of ogres lived with their chief, who instead of wine drank the blood of human beings. He had routed them all and cut off the head of the chief monster. This brave warrior was always followed by a band of faithful knights. In this band there were 5 knights of great valor. One evening, as the 5 knights sat at a feast, quaffing sake in their rice bowls, and eating all kinds of fish, raw and stewed and broiled, and toasting each other's health and exploits, the first knight, Hojo, said to the others, "Have you heard the rumor that every evening after sunset there comes an ogre to the gate of Rashomon, and that he seizes all who pass by?" The second knight, Watanabe, answered him, saying, "Do not talk such nonsense. All the ogres were killed by our chief Reiko at Oyama. It cannot be true, because even if any ogre did escape from the great killing, they would not dare to show themselves in this city, for they know that our brave master would at once attack them if he knew any of them were still alive." "Then do you disbelieve what I say, and think I am telling you a falsehood?" "No, I do not think you are telling a lie," said Watanabe. "But you have heard some old woman's story, which is not worth believing." "Then the best plan is to prove what I say by going there yourself and finding out yourself whether it is true or not," said Hojo. Watanabe, the second knight, could not bear the thought that his companion should believe that he was afraid, so he answered quickly, "Of course I will go at once and find out for myself." So Watanabe at once got ready to go. He buckled on his longsword and put on a coat of armor and tied on his large helmet. When he was ready to start, he said to the others, "Give me something so that I can prove I have been there." Then one of the men got a roll of writing paper and his box of Indian ink and brushes, and the 4 comrades wrote their names on a piece of paper. "I will take this," said Watanabe, "and put it on the gate of Rashomon, so tomorrow morning you will go and look at it. I may be able to catch an ogre or 2 by then." And he mounted his horse and rode off gallantly. It was a very dark night, and there was neither moon nor star to light Watanabe on his way. To make the darkness worse, a storm came on, the rain fell heavily, and the wind howled like wolves in the mountains. Any ordinary man would have trembled at the thought of going out of doors. But Watanabe was a brave warrior and dauntless, and his honor and word were at stake. So he sped on into the night while his companions listened to the sound of his horse's hoofs dying away in the distance, then shut the sliding shutters close, and gathered round the charcoal fire, and wondered what would happen, and whether their comrade would encounter one of those horrible Oni. At last, Watanabe reached the gate of Rashomon. But peer as he might, through the darkness he could see no sign of an ogre. "It's just as I thought," said Watanabe to himself. "There are certainly no ogres here. It is only an old woman's story. I will stick this paper on the gate so that the others can see I have been here when they come tomorrow, and then I will take my way home and laugh at them all." He fastened the piece of paper, signed by all his 4 companions, on the gate, and then turned his horse's head towards home. As he did so, he became aware that someone was behind him, and at the same time a voice called out to him to wait. Then his helmet was seized from the back. "Who are you?" said Watanabe fearlessly. He then put out his hand and groped around to find out who or what it was that held him by the helmet. As he did so, he touched something that felt like an arm. It was covered with hair and as big round as the trunk of a tree. Watanabe knew at once this was the arm of an ogre, so he drew his sword and he cut at it fiercely. There was a loud yell of pain, and then the ogre dashed in front of the warrior. Watanabe's eyes grew large with wonder, for he saw that the ogre was taller than the great gate. His eyes were flashing like mirrors in the sunlight, and his huge mouth was wide open, and as the monster breathed, flames of fire shot out of his mouth. The ogre thought to terrify his foe, but Watanabe never flinched. He attacked the ogre with all his strength, and thus they fought face to face for a long time. At last, the ogre, finding that he could neither frighten nor beat Watanabe, and that he might himself be beaten, took to flight. But Watanabe, determined not to let the monster escape, put spurs to his horse and gave chase. But though the knight rode very fast, the ogre ran faster, and to his disappointment he found himself unable to overtake the monster, who was gradually lost to sight. Watanabe returned to the gate where the fierce fight had taken place and got down from his horse. As he did so, he stumbled upon something lying on the ground. Stooping to pick it up, he found that it was one of the ogre's huge arms, which he must have slashed off in the fight. His joy was great at having secured such a prize, for this was the best of all proofs of his adventures with the ogre. So he took it up carefully and carried it home as a trophy of his victory. When he got back, he showed the arm to his comrades, who, one and all, called him the hero of their band and gave him a great feast. His wonderful deed was soon noised abroad in Kyoto, and people from far and near came to see the ogre's arm. Watanabe now began to grow uneasy as to how he should keep the arm in safety, for he knew that the ogre to whom it belonged was still alive. He felt sure that one day or the other, as soon as the ogre got over his scare, he would come to try and get his arm back again. Watanabe therefore had a box made of the strongest wood and branded with iron. In this he placed the arm, and then he sealed down the heavy lid, refusing to open it for anyone. He kept the box in his own room, and took charge of it himself, never allowing it out of his sight. Now one night he heard someone knocking at the porch, asking for admittance. When the servant went to the door to see who it was, there was only an old woman, very respectable in appearance. On being asked who she was, and what was her business, the old woman replied with a smile that she had been nurse to the master of the house when he was a little baby. If the lord of the house was at home, she begged to be allowed to see him. The servant left the old woman at the door and went to tell his master that his old nurse had come to see him. Watanabe thought it strange that she should come at that time of night, but at the thought of his old nurse, who had been like a foster mother to him, and whom he had not seen for a long time, a very tender feeling sprang up for her in his heart. He ordered the servant to show her in. The old woman was ushered into the room, and after the customary bows and greetings were over, she said, "Master, the report of your brave fight with the ogre at the gate of Rashomon is so widely known that even your poor old nurse has heard of it. Is it really true what everyone says, that you cut off one of the ogre's arms? If you did, your deed is highly to be praised." "I was very disappointed," said Watanabe, "that I was not able to take the monster captive, which was what I wished to do, instead of only cutting off an arm." "I am very proud to think," answered the old woman, "that my master was so brave to dare cut off an ogre's arm. There's nothing that can be compared to your courage. Before I die, it is the great wish of my life to see this arm," she added pleadingly. "No," said Watanabe, "I am sorry, but I cannot grant your request." "But why?" asked the old woman. "Because," replied Watanabe, "ogres are very vengeful creatures, and if I open the box, there is no telling but that the ogre may suddenly appear and carry off his arm. I have had a great box made on purpose, with a very strong lid, and in this box I keep the ogre's arm secure, and I never show it to anyone, whatever happens." "Your precaution is very reasonable," said the old woman. "But I am your old nurse, so surely you will not refuse to show me the arm. I have only just heard of your brave act, and not being able to wait till the morning, I came at once to ask you to show it to me." Watanabe was very troubled at the old woman's pleading, but he still persisted in refusing. Then the old woman said, "Do you suspect me of being a spy sent by the ogre?" "No, of course I do not suspect you of being the ogre's spy, for you are my old nurse," answered Watanabe. "Then you cannot surely refuse to show me the arm any longer," entreated the old woman, "for it is the great wish of my heart to see, for once in my life, the arm of an ogre." Watanabe could not hold out his refusal any longer, so he gave in at last, saying, "Then I will show you the ogre's arm, since you so earnestly wish to see it. Come, follow me." And he led the way to his own room, the old woman following. When they were both in the room, Watanabe shut the door carefully, and then, going towards a big box which stood in a corner of the room, he took off the heavy lid. He then called to the old woman to come near and look in, for he never took the arm out of the box. "What is it like? Let me have a good look at it," said the old nurse with a joyful face. She came nearer and nearer, as if she were afraid, till she stood right against the box. Suddenly, she plunged her hand into the box and seized the arm, crying with a fearful voice which made the room shake, "Oh, joy, I have my arm back again!" And from an old woman she was suddenly transformed into the towering figure of the frightful ogre. Watanabe sprang back and was unable to move for a moment, so great was his astonishment. But, recognizing the ogre, who had attacked him at the gate of Rashomon, he determined with his usual courage to put an end to him this time. He seized his sword, drew it out of its sheath in a flash, and tried to cut the ogre down. So quick was Watanabe that the creature had a narrow escape, but the ogre sprang up to the ceiling and, bursting through the roof, disappeared in the mist and clouds. In this way, the ogre escaped with his arm. The knight gnashed his teeth with disappointment, but that was all he could do. He waited in patience for another opportunity to dispatch the ogre. But the latter was afraid of Watanabe's great strength and daring, and never troubled Kyoto again. So, once more, the people of the city were able to go out without fear, even at night, and the brave deeds of Watanabe have never been forgotten. The end of The Ogre of Rashomon, from Japanese Fairy Tales by Yae Theodora Ozaki.
The Punishment of Loki, edited by Mara L. Pratt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It is Loki that has done this, thundered Thor, seizing the great hammer in his clenched fists. Nor will the gods of Asgard forgive this crime. No promise of his, no begging, no pleading shall save him from the punishment that belongs to him. O Baldur, Baldur, that I had slain the evil Loki ages upon ages ago, when he stole the hair from the glorious Sif, when he stole the necklace from the beautiful Freya, when he carried Idun and the apples of life away into the home of the frost giants, when he stung the dwarf and broke short the handle of my mighty hammer. Had I slain him then, this sorrow need not have come to us, O Baldur, Baldur. And the whole earth shook with the grief of Thor. The skies grew black. The wind shrieked. The lightnings flashed across the sky. His tears fell in torrents down the mountain sides. Trees were swept away, and the swollen rivers rushed and roared along their course. Never, even in the memory of the gaunt old giant at the Well of Wisdom, had such a storm of wind and rain and thunder and lightning been known. The earth people fled to the mountain caves in terror. "It is the wrath of Thor," cried Loki, gasping with dread. "Let me hide myself till it is over." And changing himself into a fish, he dived deep into the great seething mass of angry waters. But Thor and Odin were close upon him. The fiery eye of Thor had caught the sparkle of its shiny coat as the great fish shot down from the mountainside into the sea. Then, too, of what use was it to hide from the great all-seeing eye of Odin? Did he not see and hear all sights and sounds? And more than that, did he not know all things even from the beginning? "We will take a great net, and we will drag the sea," said Odin quietly. Loki heard these words and trembled. He hid himself beneath the seaweed, but so muddy were the waters that he was driven out to breathe. The great net was spread. Held by the hands of Odin and of Thor, there was no escape for Loki. Sullenly he allowed the net to close over him. There was no other way, for it stretched from shore to shore and from above the waters even to the ocean bed. And so, at last, because it was to be, the fish held, and Loki was in the power of the angry Thor. "Come back," commanded Odin, "to your own shape and size." Loki obeyed, and in his own form was borne to Asgard. The angry gods fell, one and all, upon him. Not one showed pity for him. They hated him, and well they might, for had he not slain Baldur, and so loosed the power of the frost giants upon their shining city? "Let him be bound, let him be bound," they cried. "Let him be bound, even as the Fenris wolf is bound. Let him be bound with iron fetters. Let him be nailed to the great rocks in the sea. Let a poisonous serpent hang over him, and let the serpent drop, moment by moment, through all the time to come, his burning poison upon him. Let him lie there, chained and suffering, till the last great day. All this shall be," thundered Thor. And thus it was that the cruel, evil-hearted, peace destroyer Loki suffered ages upon ages of punishment for his malice and his crime. End of The Punishment of Loki, edited by Mara L. Pratt.
The Worm of Lambton by Charles John Tibbets. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The young heir of Lambton led a dissolute and evil course of life, equally regardless of the obligations of his high estate and the sacred duties of religion. According to his profane custom, he was fishing on a Sunday and threw his line into the river to catch fish at a time when all good men should have been engaged in the solemn observance of the day. After having toiled in vain for some time, he vented his disappointment at his ill success in curses loud and deep, to the great scandal of all who heard him on their way to Holy Mass, and to the manifest peril of his own soul. At length he felt something extraordinary tugging at his line, and, in the hope of catching a large fish, he drew it up with the utmost skill and care, yet it required all his strength to bring the expected fish to land. What was his surprise and mortification when, instead of a fish, he found that he had only caught a worm of most unseemly and disgusting appearance. He hastily tore it from his hook, and threw it into a well hard by. He again threw in his line, and continued to fish, when a stranger of venerable appearance passing by asked him, "What sport?" To which he replied, "I think I've caught the devil," and directed the inquirer to look into the well. The stranger saw the worm, and remarked that he had never seen the like of it before, that it was like an eft, but that it had 9 holes on each side of its mouth, and tokened no good. The worm remained neglected in the well, but soon grew so large that it became necessary to seek another abode. It usually lay in the daytime coiled round a rock in the middle of the river, and at night frequented a neighbouring hill, twining itself around the base, and it continued to increase in length until it could lap itself 3 times around the hill. It now became the terror of the neighbourhood, devouring lambs, sucking the cow's milk, and committing every species of injury on the cattle of the affrighted peasantry. The immediate neighbourhood was soon laid waste, and the worm, finding no further support on the north side of the river, crossed the stream towards Lambton Hall, where the old lord was then living in grief and sorrow, the young heir of Lambton having repented him of his former sins and gone to the wars in a far distant land. The terrified household assembled in council, and it was proposed by the steward, a man far advanced in years and of great experience, that the large trough which stood in the courtyard should be filled with milk. The monster approached, and, eagerly drinking the milk, returned, without inflicting further injury, to repose around its favourite hill. The worm returned the next morning, crossing the stream at the same hour, and directing its way to the hall. The quantity of milk to be provided was soon found to be the product of 9 cows, and if any portion short of this quantity was neglected or forgotten, the worm showed the most violent signs of rage by lashing its tail around the trees in the park and tearing them up by the roots. Many a gallant knight of undoubted fame and prowess sought to slay this monster, which was the terror of the whole countryside, and it is related that in these mortal combats, although the worm had been frequently cut asunder, yet the several parts had immediately reunited, and the valiant assailant never escaped without the loss of life or limb, so that, after many fruitless and fatal attempts to destroy the worm, it remained, at length, in tranquil possession of its favourite hill, all men fearing to encounter so deadly an enemy. At length, after 7 long years, the gallant heir of Lambton returned from the wars of Christendom, and found the broad lands of his ancestors laid waste and desolate. He heard the wailings of the people, for their hearts were filled with terror and alarm. He hastened to the hall of his ancestors, and received the embraces of his aged father, worn out with sorrow and grief, both for the absence of his son, whom he had considered dead, and for the dreadful waste inflicted on his fair domain by the devastations of the worm. He took no rest until he crossed the river to examine the worm as it lay coiled around the base of the hill, and being a knight of tried valour and sound discretion, and hearing the fate of all those who had fallen in the strife, he consulted a sibyl on the best means to be pursued to slay the monster. He was told that he himself had been the cause of all the misery which had been brought upon the country, which increased his grief and strengthened his resolution. He was also told that he must have his best suit of mail studded with spear blades, and, taking his stand on the rock in the middle of the river, commend himself to Providence and the might of his sword, first making a solemn vow, if successful, to slay the first living thing he met, or, if he failed to do so, the lords of Lambton for 9 generations would never die in their beds. He made the solemn vow in the chapel of his forefathers, and had his coat studded with blades of the sharpest spears. He took his stand on the rock in the middle of the river, and unsheathing his trusty sword, which had never failed him in time of need, he commended himself to the will of Providence. At the accustomed hour, the worm uncoiled its lengthened folds, and, leaving the hill, took its usual course towards Lambton Hall, and approached the rock where it sometimes reposed. The knight, nothing dismayed, struck the monster on the head with all his might and main, but without producing any other visible effect than irritating and vexing the worm, which, closing on the knight, clasped its frightful coils around him, and endeavoured to strangle him in its poisonous embrace. The knight was, however, provided against this dangerous extremity, for the more closely he was pressed by the worm, the more deadly were the wounds inflicted by his coat of spear blades, until the river ran with gore. The strength of the worm diminished as its efforts increased to destroy the knight, who, seizing a favourable opportunity, made such a good use of his sword that he cut the monster in 2. The severed part was immediately carried away by the current, and the worm, being thus unable to reunite itself, was, after a long and desperate conflict, destroyed by the gallantry and courage of the Knight of Lambton. The afflicted household were devoutly engaged in prayer during the combat, but on the fortunate issue, the knight, according to promise, blew a blast on his bugle to assure his father of his safety, and that he might let loose his favourite hound, which was destined to be the sacrifice. The aged father, forgetting everything but his parental feelings, rushed forward to embrace his son. When the knight beheld his father, he was overwhelmed with grief. He could not raise his arm against his parent, but, hoping that his vow might be accomplished and the curse averted by destroying the next living thing he met, he blew another blast on his bugle. His favourite hound broke loose and bounded to receive his caresses, when the gallant knight, with grief and reluctance, once more drew his sword, still reeking with the gore of the monster, and plunged it into the heart of his faithful companion. But in vain. The prediction was fulfilled, and the Sibyl's curse pressed heavily on the house of Lambton for 9 generations. End of The Worm of Lambton by John Tibbets.